Hello and welcome to the 6 Plus show, a podcast for your wargaming and 40k needs. Hobby talk, tactics, tournament reports, lore and much more. We have it all. Please welcome your host for the evening, Tom.
Welcome back, ladies, gentlemen, and living saints, to the 6 Plus show. Today is a special. It's an event special. We've been to an event. Well, two of us have been to an event. Lee hasn't been to an event. Lee's going to an event, but maybe we'll allude to that at the end because Lee's going to an event quite soon, but not this time. Lee's going to be taking charge and asking some questions because obviously me and Chris are going to do the debriefing. And what we're going to be talking about is Beachhead Brawl, which was an absolutely massive event down in Bournemouth. Chris and I went to over this weekend. I'm just about recovered now, having done nothing all day. I don't know how you're feeling, Chris.
Not the best.
It's the post-event migraine kicking in hard. But it was a fantastic event. Had a really good time. Went down with a bunch of my local guys from sort of Berkhamsted area, and Chris came along with us, and we played a huge amount of very tough and enjoyable games. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Lee, who's going to be sort of comparing from here on out. So take it away, Lee.
Let's do it. Well, firstly, well done to both of you just for surviving that event. I mean, it's a long way to go for both of you, and it's a 7-game event, and that's something that I don't think we could ever sort of underestimate how much hard work that is.
It's pretty tiring.
But I just wanted to get us all together and just talk about how you thought it went. Talk about your games, and then sort of share a bit of insight with everybody, our listening millions.
Oh yeah,
so many.
Oh, huge viewership.
In the future, we'll look back on this with posterity. So I guess the first bit I want to talk about is really just open to both of you, maybe not quite at the same time, but just to figure out sort of what your goals were for this event coming into it. So Chris, if we start with you, obviously new book.
Yeah, so obviously it's the Custodes. There's a lot of chatter about how strong they are. They perform really well at LVO. So it's one of those things where I played a little bit of Custodes recently. I'd only had 2 practice games, and I wanted to use it as an opportunity to practice the list that I'll be taking to a team tournament in a couple of weeks, see how it went, learn kind of how Custodes play the new missions, because this was the first time we were using the new missions. Some of the missions I hadn't even played yet at all, so that was a nice opportunity to have a go at those, and then just kind of see how they match up in a competitive environment against a variety of different lists, really. In terms of personal goals, I mean, I'm always going to look to win more than I lose, so I guess it was a 4-3 or on a good day, 5-2 kind of hope, because I know Custodes well. But in terms of the processes, I just wanted to focus on learning how to play the missions and how to kind of play the list again when I hadn't played them a huge amount. And obviously they are very different to the AdMech.
Yes.
So I just wanted to try and get my head around that, really.
You've touched on something important there, which is this is the first really big event now running these new missions. So it was the first chance for them to get a proper run out. We've had a couple of practice games using them, but sort of you don't really get a feel for them until they use at these big events. So we'll come on to that in a little bit. But what about you, Tom? What were your goals for the event?
I was quite process focused as well, and learning focused. I think above all else, I wanted to play. My goals were to play Tau and to play Custodes. So sadly, I didn't manage to achieve both those things, as we'll come to later. But I knew there were 2 new books I hadn't played against yet. I was keen to play them and see how I got on and start learning what they were like. I wanted to learn the new missions, and I'd combined Drukarliquins and Harlequins for this, for Drukarliquins trademark. And I wanted to see what that could do as well, to start getting a sense of what combinations with that might be fun, with one eye on the new Eldari book when that comes out, and what that might offer as well.
Yeah, that's great. So with that in mind, then, let's just move on to something that I find really important. And I think if people watching this want to sort of think about if they're going to go to Beachhead next year, it's just a little bit of a talk about the actual event itself before we go into the games. So
yeah.
Things that always drive me insane. So let's just see how Beachhead fared. So how was the venue generally?
It was highly impressive.
Yeah.
It's a convention centre. I didn't realise actually there was actually a wargaming convention going on. You turn up, and it was this just incredible, huge hall filled with loads of different stalls and that sort of thing.
All
And that
sorts of
wasn't even the
games.
tournament. That wasn't the tournament. It was you kind of had to go
Okay.
through another one into this other massive hall where there was, whatever, 100 odd tables. And then you could kind of look around the convention during your break. Obviously, there were loads of just members of the public walking around who then also come in and wander around and look at the games. There was this huge like Titans game going on.
Yeah, I saw that picture.
So it was like all these warlord Titans, all these £500,000 models, and I don't know, it was like 30, 40, 50 of them.
Wow.
It was nuts. It was
the amount of
nuts.
money.
They're like a traveling Titans game playing.
Yeah, they
group.
play
They're
Adeptus Titanicus, don't they?
completely
But with the big
insane.
models.
Wow.
But yeah,
So that's a new army for you,
full
Chris. that is.
scale.
Yeah.
There was a slightly in the hall as we were leaving on the Saturday night. There was a slightly less impressive, but to me very intriguing game that appeared to involve a whole bunch of penguins set up on the ground in
Codex
a sort of
penguins.
weird formation. And so I don't know. Yeah, we were speculating whether Codex Penguins is coming sometime soon, and this was play testing for that.
I am all in on that. If that comes
So
out.
I never actually found the time to go and actually find out what this Mystery Penguins game was, and that's a shame.
That's a regret. If anyone out there is watching, please do leave a comment on that.
it's
not anything else.
The Bournemouth International Centre, or the BIC, I had been there when I was younger to see sort of shit indie bands and that sort of thing. It's a good venue. It's right in the centre of Bournemouth. It's right on the sea, and it was really you get that sense of spectacle, don't you, Chris? It's big and impressive as a building. You've got that sense there's other stuff going on.
Got Seaside right behind you.
There's people playing
It's
Blood Bowl.
incredible
There's
view.
people playing Star Wars. There's people playing Age of Sigmar. There was all sorts of other stuff going on.
Yeah.
And a bit more sort of ceremony and pomp about it as well, which was cool.
It sounds great.
Yeah, it was a really cool place.
To bring it back down to the boring reality and practicality of an event, things that sort of have bothered me in the past. Was there adequate parking at the event? It was a huge event. Could you park your car? Did it
So
cost you money to park your car?
Yeah, lots. So,
So Bournemouth
worth
was
knowing.
expensive. The parking was expensive as hell, but it was very accessible, wasn't it, Chris? You could get it easy enough.
yeah, so you could park at the BH2, which was a £5 for the day, which I did day one. Then it's like a 2-minute walk to the venue. And day two, because Tom was worried we were going to be late, even though we were half an hour early.
Shut up, Chris.
We parked next to it, and that cost me £14 for the day.
So that is one for the viewers to note.
Yeah, so if you are going, BH2 is like 2 minutes away. It's a £5 for the day. It's preferable.
Don't let me hurry you.
If you're going with Tom, you'll be okay.
Ignore me. It's fine. You'll get there okay. You'll be all right.
With regards to when you were playing then, plenty of space around the tables? Were you crammed in? Place to sit down? I don't know about you guys. I typically stand up for way too long at these things.
Seating was good. There was chairs for literally everyone, I think. There were chairs at all tables, and they were quite nice, plushy little sort of pull-out ones that were quite nice for comfort. Space was okay. It was absolutely fine. I felt like there maybe was more space actually than they utilised a bit in that the hall was huge. But it was as space goes, it was as good as anything. And there was space either side of table for sort of deploying and putting armies on and all that stuff, which I think you do.
So when you have the long,
need,
could you use all the deployment maps and get around the tables?
No,
not entirely.
because it was long rows.
Yeah, okay, still long rows.
So you still had some rows where you were stuck depending on where you were.
Yeah. And then the big question for me: how was the food? How was the drink? So it's 7 games. They better feed and water you well. Is all I'm saying.
What do you think, Chris?
The silence is telling.
No, so day one I bought my own stuff, so that was all fine. They had sandwiches, burgers, hot dogs on offer. They had water jugs out, which you could go and fill your water bottle.
Well, that's
up
good.
at. It was quite expensive. The burger, it was like a bacon cheeseburger. It was like £7.50.
There's a lot.
So I didn't have anything on the Saturday. On the Sunday, I went in and I did have lunch, but they were out of the burger, so I had a hot dog, which was decidedly average. But I guess it's just a convention. But yeah, they had like 2-pint cups, didn't they?
I think the issue with it was that there was nothing. There wasn't really like a good alternative immediately nearby. You were kind of mixing up. It was a bit of a trick, bit of a trek out of the big hall. The queues are a bit long. And you know how it is at these things because everyone sort of finishes at roughly the same time. And so that I think on the Sunday I just didn't have lunch in the end. I was just there was game just ran on and there was just other stuff. And so it was there was provision and it was okay. It was conference hall pricing, which is
it's going to be a lot
more, probably a bit more.
And with all that processed meat, how are the toilets?
Not good, not enough.
No.
There was one. There was only really one. There was only one good one in range of where we were.
It got blocked.
It got one of the two toilets got blocked. And so that was hard going. That wasn't nice.
That's an unfair reflection on the event, I suppose, that can happen.
But that's rough. That was rough.
I'm sure it was. So that's a little bit about the actual venue, which is great. Good for people to understand.
In terms of if you want to go to see a big event and you want a sense of spectacle, I think Beachhead is really good for that.
Yeah.
I think it's certainly compared to some of the other bigger ones that we've done in the UK.
Very competitive as well.
It's a very competitive scene. It draws in all of the sort of South Coasty and south of England kind of influency, YouTubey competitive people, and that's quite nice. It's nice to see all of the different celebs around, assuming they haven't got too hungover to make it in. And it's generally a real spectacle, which is nice. And so in that sense, I think if I remember the first time I went to it, and it was really quite something, and it still retained that for me even on the second go round.
That's great. So with regards to then more specifically around the event, and before we start, I just want to talk about the terrain that they had. Always one of the most contentious things at an event is sort of the quality of the terrain, if it's got good obscuring or line of sight blocking, if there's just enough of it, if it's preset layout, or in this case, player place. So I just want to get your feedback. So if we say, was each table sufficiently covered in terrain?
This is a question of interpretation, isn't it, Chris, really?
Yeah. Was there... Okay, let me break it down even. Was each table the same, or were they different?
So, each table had a set of terrain from Foreground. We do a variety of different terrain. Their terrain is really high quality. It's pre-coloured. You just have to build it. And they do different sets. Though all the sets also give the option of giving you windows or not having windows. So what they had done on the different terrains, they popped out different amounts of windows. So therefore you led to a situation where you had some maps which had basically just ruins, which was really good line of sight blocking terrain because you did have a lot of it.
The overall cover in terms of obscuring, in terms of big buildings, very good. Like lots.
The issue lay in the fact that different tables had different amount of windows popped out. And I will talk about that in one of my games.
Sure, let's not spend too much time on that now then.
It's quite relevant.
Yeah, we'll come back to it. It's worth saying that Beachhead, they put out an FAQ pack, which again, to their credit, that's great. You know, they ruled on a load of stuff. They ruled on a load of rules issues and made it clear where they stood on a few areas of ambiguity. One area they didn't rule on, which they could have done with ruling on, was how we were playing ground floor buildings. And on the day, they ended up ruling in favour of just, if there's holes through it, you can see through it. Which, again, we're going to come back to this, but I don't think you can play 40k in its current state and have windows on ground floor buildings. It's not good. It's not good. But we'll come back to that. We'll discuss it. The foreground kits are really cool. And actually, I was pleasantly surprised at the variety between tables. I was worried it was going to be all of like one set or something like that. But actually, there were lots of different types. You got your proper ruined city blocks and stuff. You've got more sort of alien or Xenos or Chaos looking kind of jaggedy edged looking.
Yeah, the Necrotech
set. Necrotech stuff.
Foreground sets. They are very good.
And there were a few really nice improvised bits of like dense and blocking terrain as well. There were a few that looked like a combination of Mechanicus terrain with beer cans that looked absolutely amazing. There was something very interesting, some interesting sort of enterprise going on to make a few of the other bits as well. And it hit that sweet spot of being quite immersing, but also actually serving the game in a practical way. And
what can you ask for?
Again, we'll come back to it, but I certainly didn't have a single game where I felt like terrain cost me a game.
Okay,
which is quite unusual for an event, to be honest. Yeah.
That leads me into my last question, really, on this, which was obviously this was, and I don't want to push you too much on it if you're going to go into it in your games, but this was an event with player place terrain, which is quite an unusual concept for us. Just wondering if you could give me your initial hot take on how you found that.
What do you reckon, Chris?
I think as you get to game 4 and 5, you really can't be bothered anymore. You're like, oh man, right, just whack it. So I kind of had a couple of things like in my mind. I'd be like, for my list, I want a jump point. So my first deployment was always put a 2-floor ruin as close to the middle of the board as I could, which was quite interesting in some of the games actually. And yeah, I think it definitely impacts it. I had one game in particular, I think I probably just didn't get it right. I think once you get to a certain level of player place terrain, I think there's no advantage. I think once you get to a certain level, it's just, well, we're going to have roughly the same thing and it's going to be a standard board setup. But yeah, it was an interesting experience. I personally prefer it all laid out beforehand.
And Tom?
I think it's grown on me. I really didn't like it when it first came in, and I still have a sense with player place terrain that it helps exactly the players that don't need help, and it hurts exactly the players that do. Because if you have a good plan for your terrain and you're good at list designing to fit terrain, then you'll benefit massively from it. And if you don't, you won't. So it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's just adding another layer of advantage to those that are already more polished, I think, which is a bit harsh at times. But it offered massive protection. And this is the thing. I didn't feel like I won a game or lost a game based on the ability to really get at someone before they could do anything. Because player place terrain always means you're going to be able to hide a good chunk of your stuff and you're going to be able to launch from suitable points to go and make your attacks on objectives and stuff. So I liked that side of it a lot. And there were a couple of games, which and we'll talk about this, there were a couple of games where the random or chaotic expressions of our combination of terrain placement produced quite interesting layouts. It wasn't always exactly as you'd expect, and it certainly wasn't always symmetrical. And so, yeah, so that was nice. I think the challenge is always going to be having that blend of feeling like you're playing on new environments and different environments, whilst also allowing for some degree of standardization that allows the game to function in a sensible way. Because as novel as it is to play on an Orc Fortress terrain board against AdMech, it's in practice that's a horrible thing to do, and it's a difficult one. I really like the Hellstorm way of doing it, where they've got 3 different types of terrain, and you don't know which one you'll land on across an event because they're just set up on different tables. So you might land on a table that's a particular type of terrain set up for a particular mission, and that may combo in a certain way, but who knows? I quite like that as compared to the sort of LGT very rigidly, like each mission has this set up of terrain.
Also, it takes too long to measure all that.
Like a bit of chaos. With my terrain placement. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It has grown on me, but yeah, I think there must be better solutions out there.
Yeah, I can't wait to try it.
Man.
But let's go into the meat of this conversation, which is going to be just a little look through your different games between you. And what I'd like to do, if you can, is as we go through, just do a little bit about your opponent's list. Don't necessarily need to run through it all, but if you could just sort of say what they were running and particularly if there's anything notable in it, anything unusual, anything we're not normally seeing. And also, if you can remember, I know it's only been a day, but I know how hard it is. If you can think about which mission it was between you, I guess you might be able to figure that. And also which secondaries you took and sort of what your game plan was for scoring those.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that in mind then, let's start with you, Chris. Your first game against Death Guard. How did you find that?
Cool. So for those of you who didn't listen to our last podcast, you disgraceful people, I was taking Custodes. I had Trajan, Shield Captain and Bike, 2 units of Sagittarum, unit of Sisters, then had -1 to hit banner, 3 Wardens, 2 Lone Alaris, a Achilles Dreadnought, and then 3 units of 3 bikes. So it's a pretty general list, which was Emperor's chosen. So first game was Death Guard, and the mission was secure missing artifacts, which is the old priority targets. So I decided to take Stranglehold, Investigate Signal, and To the Last. I was really struggling on my third one. I was really tempted by Auric Mortalis, and that is because my opponent had Morty.
And his opponent was Gareth. In case you're watching, Gareth, hi
Gareth.
We love you. Well done on your very commendable showing at Beachhead, by the way. Anyway, back to you, Chris.
Yes. So I played Gareth at the first in the first game of my last event as well. He had Blood Ravens.
Yeah, you did. Yeah,
poor guy. It was Custodes then, but it was the old book. So yeah, he had Morty, and it's always hard with Morty because obviously he can be such a force multiplier, and if he just spikes his 4-up invuln, he can get into your line. If he just keeps spiking his 4-up invuln, he can chew through a lot of things. So it's I had to be a bit wary of that. So I was really tempted with Auric Mortalis, but then I decided not to go for it because I was like, well, maybe I'll just stay away from Morty and just keep pew-pewing him, and we'll see how it goes. As it was, Gareth got first turn. He had Morty, he had 3 bloat drones, one of which had close combat. He had some Plague Marines. He had 1 Plague Burst Crawler. And he got first turn, so he just moved up into the middle of the board. I then stuck something on the middle objective. And so I said, go, see what you can do. So I really hung back apart from my lone Alaris who went and sat on that middle objective for my stranglehold. And then I managed to kill the middle bloat drone and kill, or do 9 wounds to Morty. So that was quite reasonable.
Yeah, great start.
Then it was kind of, well, what does he do? So he kind of moved a bit more forward. But Morty annihilated that poor lone Alaris. But other than that, there wasn't really much he could do. He charged his Demon Prince into my bikes, and he didn't go very well. He didn't kill a bike. And then he got taken down to 2 wounds on the fight back or something.
Ouch.
So it was then my go, and it was kind of like, right, well, this is the finishing blow. So just everything moved into the middle, killed Morty, killed the Demon Prince, and the middle of the board was mine, and his kind of his ability to affect the board was really kind of vanished. So he kind of chucked his last 2 vehicles in, but they kind of bounced, and it's just a bit of a clean-up job, really. It's a really hard matchup for him. Like at the end of the day, if you're taking Mortarion and he can only really get to kill 1 60-point model before he dies, you're going to really struggle in the game. That mission, he had 5 Terminators, which he dropped down in Deep Strike. They made the charge, but they kind of bounced just because I can put all the buffs on my defensively as well. I can turn off rerolls, transhuman. It was a really tough game for Gareth, but he took it very well. And the score finished 97-59. So I think 59's a really
good show. I think I did worse when I played my Thousand Suns into Custodes.
You got royally spanked. So well done, Gareth. Basically,
well done, Gareth.
And Gareth went on to finish 3-3 with the Death Guard, which
amazing.
was one of his best tournament showings in a long time, and delighted for him because he is a true lover of the hobby and always takes exactly what he wants to take, and isn't ever too worried about the meta. And it was just nice to see him have a good weekend and smash some people in with Mortarion. So it's great.
That is great.
He did say how Mortarion against Grey Knights had just gone huge.
It can be. It's one of those things where he either if it goes to plan, he just carries the game, doesn't he? He can just completely. I've lost big time to Mortarion. I think Summer Slaughter, I went in on Mortarion, got completely ruined.
Didn't you send in 1 Succubus and thought that would do it?
Yeah, I did send in 1 Succubus. I was quite high on what 1 Succubus could do at that point, and I was gravely mistaken about how badly that would do it.
No, that's great. Speaking of bad decisions, Tom, how did your game go? Did you enjoy the first game into the Blood Angels?
Yeah, so the Blood Angels. So I played against Adam, and Adam in many ways ran Blood Angels, I think, the way that I would run Blood Angels if I was playing them now, which is you just go all in on melee jump pack units, and you lean in on their good characters. He had Astarath handing out prayers and being a general beats deck. He had Dante in there. And he had a tooled up librarian with Null Zone, which obviously Eldar do not like. And he also had the banner guy, and he'd done the combo I really like with Blood Angels, which is Rites of War to give obsec, and then Angel's Visage to take it away.
Yeah, that's lovely.
So you've got a little objective flipper combo where you're going to land somewhere with your character. Their obsec isn't happening. Everything you have is obsec. So for that sort of tug of war over objectives, you're really set up. So it was a nice list. It was very aggro. Oh, and of course, what you also have was the little bastard company, Death Company, 5 of them with hammers that can pre-game move, can run like 28 inches or something and then come and smash you up with hammers. So to reiterate, for those who don't know what I was running Drukarliquins. That meant I had 4 Star Weavers full of troops with fusion pistols to give me my anti-tank. I had a Troop Master for some shenanigans, a Shadow Seer, and then I had a bunch of Drukari. I had 10 Grotesques in 2 packs of 5. I had Drazar, an Archon with Fight Last, a Succubus with just loads of attacks with the Triptych Whip. And then I had, just Obsec racks and a couple of Raiders to kind of ferry them all around. So mine was quite a mobile force, depended very heavily on its transport. So I'm looking at Adam's list and thinking, I cannot let a bunch of angry men with hammers get into my transports at the start of the game, because then I'm walking and he's got jump packs, and that's a very sad day.
Yeah.
And the other thought I remember, because I joked with Adam after his turn 1, there are 2 types of Blood Angels players, right? And you know which one you're playing against after their turn 1. Because either everything has come at you straight away, which I was like, please do that. Run everything right at me so I can run everything right at you, and we can play stabbing, because I'm quite... Eldar and Drukari are quite good at stabbing at the moment. And that would go my way. Sadly, Adam was not that kind of player. Adam was a very sensible, cautious, measured, meticulous player, knew his army very well, and played a really tight game. So he took Stranglehold, he took Oaths, and he took Retrieve Nachman data. I took Stranglehold, I took no prisoners, because I find with Blood Angels most of the time, you're so busy just trying to stay alive and kill their guys before they kill you, that you don't have that much time for other secondaries. So I was like, that's probably not going to be a high scorer, that would be like 9-10 at best. But you just they don't give you enough time with a list like that to actually get on and do other stuff. And then I took Nachman data as well, just because I have lots of cheap little Obsec units that I can usually manage to crack that out as well. That's not so bad. And with secure missing artifacts, that's kind of a rejigged hold your priority objective. There weren't additional layers of action, so I was like, I can manage. I can manage to retrieve a bit of data.
Yeah.
So the way. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you go.
Keep going, Tom.
No. What's your question?
I was going to say. So with obviously, I'm thinking about your list. And I'm thinking about Adam's list, and I just wonder what your plan is if you happen to go second. Like, did you have to go back to old-fashioned screening, or sort of 18 to one side?
So with the way that mission's set out, it's got a central objective. It's got the objectives around the sides. I very much was aware that he was going to probably going to want to play for the center because Oaths, and probably going to want to play on the flanks as well. And he's got the speed to do all of those things. And so I was conscious, and I think my biggest fear, and this is probably where if I'd been playing in Adam's position, I'd have played differently. I was afraid of him making a sort of turn 3, turn 4 jump and properly pushing all the way through to my backfield rather than getting distracted by what I wanted to do on the flanks. I had to basically backline everything, because the distance from where he deployed to my deployment zone on that mission isn't that far. So I had to really take the Death Company really seriously. So I was starting a long way back. I think started so far back that Adam actually went first and didn't move his Death Company at all. He was like, no, they're going to wait. They've done their job. They've done their job. You've deployed way back. That's fine. I'm not going to get into anything I'd like to get into this turn, so I'm going to hold them back now. And he was super cautious, and he literally just booped out some incursors to the middle, sent some Sangard and some Van Vets sort of down the right flank, and then kept it all back, waiting to see what I would do. Because of course he's got a banner for +2 movement. He's got this phenomenal range to advance and charge with all of these units. So if I overextend anything, I'm getting smacked in the head by a bunch of Blood Angels. So he played it really well. And actually my turn 1 was disastrous, because I was like, well, I need to pick up those incursors in the middle, because that will stop them getting Oaths and that will get me Stranglehold. So I sent a fusion boat over to do that. And had a bit of other shooting lined up as well, sort of incidental shooting. And then I was spreading out. I was taking the left flank. He didn't have anything realistically to stop me doing that. My Harlequins were quicker, so they got to the right flank that he was headed for before him, which is why Harlequins are brilliant, because they just go wherever they want to go all game. We'll come back to that as a running theme. If they would need to be somewhere, they just get there straight away.
It's great.
22-inch movement on those transports.
Yeah,
it's just completely insane. And so I was feeling quite good about the flanks because I had them both locked down with stuff at this point. But then I just couldn't kill any Incursus at all. Between smoke, he had -1 to hit on them with smoke. He had transhuman on them. I just I don't know that I even killed one. I was then stuck there with this boat, and I'd already spent point CP on redeploy. I then had to charge the Incursus with the boat, fight, use 2 CP to run away to get that boat out of harm's way. Otherwise, it was just going to get wrecked by Blood Angels. So we'd had this incredibly cagey turn 1 where nothing had really happened. But I'd spent all my CP. So I was like, oh God, how's this going to go? And then over the rest of the game, Adam got a bit keener, kind of started coming out, started committing more stuff. And eventually the opportunities I needed presented themselves, which was mainly just to fire fusion pistols at Sangard. That was always the goal. I was like, I'm going to ignore the Van Vets till I've killed the Sanguinary Guard with fusion. Then I'll get into the Van Vets in melee, because that's the only way I have enough attacks to get through the fora. Eventually those opportunities presented itself. We had a bit of a tug of war over the middle, gradually committing more and more stuff. And a couple of the fights went my way rather than his. And I think he was slightly undercommitted down the right-hand side, which he really needed for the overall score. And I managed to sort of overwhelm him there. Succubus had sort of gone along with the Harlequins, and she did a good job sort of cleaning up. She killed Dante, who then killed her in revenge. It was beautiful. Absolutely classic moment. So eventually the score kind of edged ahead on the primary. He lost it on the primary. He was pretty polished elsewhere. He had one terrible bit of luck. Van Vets came in to do R&D, rolled a 6. As you can do now, that's the only way they can fail it. 1 in 6 chance. And they failed it and then sat in front of some grotesques who just eventually gobbled them. That fight went on for what felt like forever, but did eventually gobble them. So it was a good tight game, and it was one that was quite fraught, especially early on, because I did get a little bit of a points drop as he got up on O's and I dropped Stranglehold at the start. But eventually the primary, because of that castle, the way the Blood Angels play really has to stick together for it to work.
All the buffs, isn't it, if you lose them?
all the buffs, all the auras, everything else. And that meant that he was just reluctant to pull stuff out of that, and he needed to commit more heavily to one side to just knock me off one of those flanks earlier. So it ended 89-67. But it was a really good tight
game
and technical game. Yeah, really technical game. And as I was saying to us, I wish, I was hoping you weren't going to be that kind of Blood Angels player. the one that takes their time and measures and knows that they get stronger as the game goes on. So great match. And Adam was an absolute babe, lovely guy, and sort of clearly a true Blood Angels fan as well. So that was really nice to play.
That's awesome. Coming into something, we're going to have to just do this one quickly to spare Chris's feelings. Chris, how was your game 2 against the new Tau?
It's quite painful for me. So, spoiler alert, Vic went undefeated and finished in 2nd place.
Vic Vijay of Dice Down, right?
Yeah, Vic
notably good player.
Very strong player. So that kind of gives you a hint that I did not win this game. So Vic was running, he'd basically gone just big units of shooty, hard hitting. Didn't have much indirect, but he had 2 crisis bombs with loads of plasma and stuff. So just loads
Great into Custodes.
Yeah, exactly. Loads of damage 2 and damage 3. Then he had a big unit of broadsides, and he had loads of other stuff. No, Hammerhead, no Devilfish.
It's like the Hammerhead was overhyped.
Yeah, exactly. No
I'm
Storm
sad that the
Surge.
Devilfish isn't making it in, because I love the Devilfish.
No,
That's a shame.
he had
Come on,
just
Jamie, you can do it.
Yeah, Jamie will do it.
He had it was just those 3 big blobs, but they all had lots of drones to really absorb the fire. Now, this is the game I want to talk about in terms of terrain, because our terrain, every single piece had all of its windows popped out.
That's rough.
Now, what this means is that if you are inside the terrain so that you can't be seen from the outside, from like around the angles, you can still be seen through because you're touching the terrain. Tau with Montcar are obviously incredibly maneuverable.
So quick, yeah.
So they have the ability to just go down one side and still shoot you. Essentially, at no point was I able to stay hidden apart from turn 1. The way we deployed our terrain, I mean, maybe in hindsight I could have deployed better, but I'm not entirely sure. I think he deployed his well. He didn't give me any good jump points. It was another 5-die mission, so it's called Conversion. And essentially, just off to the centre, I had a big block of terrain. And I just put a few things in the terrain, ready to run onto the middle objective for kind of my stranglehold. I'd chosen stranglehold, no prisoners, and deployed teleport homers. So he started one crisis suit, but I had stealth suits to bring in the crisis bomb within 10 inches turn 1 if he wanted. So he started one off the board, everything else on the board. He went first. He did a little bit of chip damage. I think he killed like one bike or something like that. And I was like, well, what do I do? The whole middle of the board, because he deployed his terrain quite far back and on the edges, the whole middle of the board was just empty. I was like, what do I do here? I'd certainly made a couple of mistakes, I think, I definitely made mistakes with how I played this. So I sent 1 unit of bikes down the right-hand side, to try and to kill some drones which were there, but then sit behind the terrain and not be shot apart from by fire warriors, because his stealth suits were over on the other side. I was like, well, he'll bring in his crisis bomb over there. And then I shoved my 2 units of bikes down the left-hand side behind a big building. Right, and then hopefully I'll only lose 1 unit, and then I'll just charge him next turn and get into his lines and we'll be fine. What actually happened was the deep striking crisis bomb unit went straight where my bikes were on the right hand side. They all died. The broadsides touched the terrain, shot through the building which I was hiding behind, blew up them. The other crisis bomb jumped from one terrain to another, was sat in the terrain so could see out, blew up my other unit of bikes.
Wow. That's brutal.
So, yeah, he did it. He prioritised well, he kept splitting his shooting. He had re-rolls everywhere. So, broadsides re-rolling everything, crisis bomb re-rolling everything. Third crisis bomb was re-rolling like wounds or something.
Yeah, Monocar seems to give just re-roll wounds out all over the place, right?
Obviously, I can only transhuman and re-roll or turn off re-rolls for 1 unit. They all died. And
that's most of the army, isn't it?
That's all the hard-hitting power. I had no ability to get to any of his stuff for a turn 2 charge of my own. And yeah, I just got absolutely rinsed. The game ended 95-37. Ouch. We just called it on turn 4.
Yeah. Did you have anything left? Or was it gone?
Oh, well, I would have been tabled turn 4.
Yeah, okay.
So,
it goes to show, I mean, I've played against the Custodes, and I know a number of people have, that they feel incredibly hard to kill. So to be tabled in 4 turns is truly terrifying as to what happens next for a lot of other armies too.
I think if I have places to hide and I can jump and he can't get to me as easily, I think I'm fine. But as it was, he basically just sat near to his deployment zone and shot at me.
Yeah, how different do you think the game is if you have a table where the windows are not all popped out?
I think it's really interesting because broadsides aren't manoeuvrable.
No.
The crisis bomb is reasonably manoeuvrable and he's got the deep striking one. But if I can screen out that deep strike and just get to a point of safety, like if I think about any of the other maps I played on, most of them I actually have some place to hide.
It's quite unusual, that table.
I'm not saying I win because Vic's a very good player.
Vic is brilliant.
Running a very good
I played it once and it still hurts.
He won the Beachhead before this one, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not saying... I'm saying I can make it a lot closer. He literally just played Custodes on a map with a lot more tape, and he'd won like 97-85.
Yeah, that's a real game.
So, yeah, there's different... He said, he was like, all you could really do on this table was just deploy everything in the middle or in my big in my big ruin. Just take the punishment with the cover save and the dense
hope for the best.
Hope for the best.
Yeah, so just
and then
rush
shoot out. But I'm like, well, the shooting out's not going to do much. So I did turn 1. I shot into all his drones. He made a bunch of 4-ups on the shield drones. I killed like 2 drones.
You don't have enough bullets to get.
So you can't target them.
Yeah, you don't have enough shots.
Yeah. So it was a frustrating game because I feel like I didn't at all give a good account of myself. But I do think the board probably did affect that.
Yeah.
Because I think in reality there wasn't anywhere I could realistically.
Yeah, it sounds brutal, but it sounds like you were effectively in you may as well have had no terrain, which is
It
unfair
felt
because obviously
like
you
that.
did have terrain, but obviously given the two armies that you had, 2 other armies it might not make any difference to, but in that particular army, that particular match, it made a huge difference.
Because it sounds like, it's a matchup that's hard for Custodes, but the Custodes have game in as long as they can hide and jump. And so, unfortunate, I think.
They got to do everything they're good at, and you didn't get to do anything that you're good at. So.
Exactly.
And the -1 banner was on the list for Tau, but the problem was that as soon as I was like, oh God, I need to get off, so I sprayed myself off to these corners, and my -1 banner was just like, guys, anyone?
Who wants to not get shot? Anyone at all? No?
You're
Okay.
all really far away from me.
Well, I'm -1 to hit. I'm fine.
The dreadnought I'm next to, which is just, doing waving around in the breeze. So, it wasn't a great game, but he was an absolute gent to play, and he was lovely, and we had a great time. But just the shellacking I received was
it still hurts.
Was not the one. So hopefully next time I get an opportunity to play Vic, I can make it a bit closer.
Fingers crossed. With that then, let's move to your game 2, Tom, which was against my dear faction.
It was your dear faction. It was the Thousand Suns.
So normally I would hope that you would lose, but I'm going to...
Yeah, absolutely right.
But seeing as you're also a dear friend, benefit of the doubt. How did that game go?
This was a game in which, and I had a couple this weekend, where it was a game in which I really felt the year plus of playing an experience come through. And I was really, really happy with how this went, because this was a game where strategically I had a plan that I felt was well developed. And actually in the face of an opponent and so I played against a guy called James, who was lovely. And I would say, the first thing to say is that James clearly had a fantastic brain for the game. Mm-hmm. And James, about halfway through this game, realised what I'd realised at the start, which was that there was a way to set this up to make this very, very difficult for him, and he hadn't anticipated it. But that was largely in part because he'd had a really tough game 1, and I think there'd been some TO rulings, and he'd been quite frazzled. It had all been quite tough on him. And so James had a really nice Thousand Suns list, had a big Terminator brick, had Araman, Demon Prince, the one that won't die, the really tough Demon Prince.
The removes your attacks, that one.
Yeah. And he had some, a bunch of rubrics. He had a bunch of Contemptors supporting. I think he'd gone with the Plasma on the Contemptors, I guess, hunting for Custodes, maybe. I think that was the logic, perhaps getting some more damage in.
Makes sense.
Damage 2, damage 3, rather than, because I don't know how useful Volkite currently is now with the meta the way useful. It is. So they were tooled up slightly differently, and that was the rub of the list, which again in some ways highlights the Thousand Suns don't get tons to work with, do they?
No, I always find I'm sort of 1 or 2 units short of being able to play the mission effectively.
So it's an elite army. It wants to play the psychic game well, and so I knew going in, I'm like, right, my situation is I've got a Shadow Seer, so he's going to get 15 points on Wrath of Magnus. So so for a lot of this game, what I was pleased with was that I was just mapping game state from the very start and keeping a really close eye on it, which is not something I do. I like to go flying in and work it all out later. But in this case, I was like, I need to put 15 points on him at the start for Wrath of Magnus because he's going to get that. So I need to work out what game plan gets me there when that's what he's going to have. So for this one, I went for To the Last, which is for Grotesques, both Grotesque packs and Drazar, because I was like, I know Thousand Suns don't want to get too close to me.
Mm-hmm. And they also can't. They're not quick enough.
And they can't. This was Cult of Time, so he couldn't teleport around, which makes my life a lot easier. He had the crystal, but he only had the 1 redeploy. So I was like, To the Last, that cancels out Wrath of Magnus. If I'm careful, that's 15-15. So that helps. I took Stranglehold. We were playing Conversion. Again, it's got a central objective. And the bonus points for the mission revolve around holding that central objective, getting back on it. Corrupted Ground, I think it's called. So I was like, with that setup, I've got enough cheap, cheerful obsec to be flinging something out every turn, and I can get 15 on Stranglehold doing that. So that's 2 secondaries where I'm looking at 30 if I just keep things tight and don't commit too much. And I also took Nightman Data because, again, I'm good at that. But I was anticipating in this game, and I was correct. I was like, I reckon 8's the most I'm getting for that.
Yeah.
But that's 15-15-8. That's a good secondary
base.
Sure thing. And then we'll build from there and see. Now, James, then, where we revealed secondaries, he'd taken Wrath of Magnus, so there was his 15. But he'd also taken Bring It Down, and he'd also taken Psychic Interrogation. Now, bring it down for my list, even if you do the best you possibly can, you're getting 8 points. There's 2 Raiders, 4 Star Weavers. That's not enough.
No.
And he'd also taken Psychic Interrogation. And at that point, I was like, right, I can win this without ever really getting into him at all.
You just don't have to put any characters
characters just stay in transports. So for 2 turns, like my turn 1, I put 5 racks in the middle, and I said, your turn. And that was it. And he was a bit confused initially. I think I flew a couple of Star Weavers. The classic Harlequins take 1 flank rapidly. That's well away from him. Can't do anything about it. 5 racks in the middle. You'll go.
That's so funny.
And so he redeploys. He uses his crystal early, which again it was maybe he didn't need to do that. A bit rushed. Uses his crystal to get the Terminators over to the other flank, the opposite.
That's why duplicity is so good, because I often do that with my first time. I just hide them completely and just use my duplicity teleport to get them where they need to be.
Yeah, exactly that. And we'll come back to one of my later games. The perfect use of a teleport in one of my later games. But anyway, we'll come back to it. So he pops the one thing he's got to get him behind me early, and he uses it basically to try and counter my move to the other flank, and he gets his Terminators over to that side with his Sorcerer or whoever it is that's got it. And he starts coming out to clear the racks, but he's wary, he knows my stuff's there, he's wary of coming too close. So he tries to clear the racks with psychic powers, and just because of the 5-up shrug, they just don't die. So I still have a couple left on the objective in my turn 2, so I get a big old primary swing turn 2, which massively helps sort of secure the game plan I've already got, which is just try and keep the game the way it is and avoid getting done too much. So again, I think I put 5 more racks out. I think I start floating a Raider over to the other side, and I keep all the characters in vehicles. And I say, again, your turn. And so he's now lost 6 on interrogation.
Yeah.
So now I'm like, the most he can get is 9. I know I'm set up to get 15. I can now probably just ride this out. And where it gets funny and scary is that then he then yeets his 10 Terminators into my lines because he realizes the situation. He realizes he's got to play catch up. And the Terminators come in, and I'm not too worried because I've fought against Rubric Terminators, and I know their shooting is terrifying. Their melee is not. Their melee's fine. You can deal with it, right? And I've also had Drukhari and Eldari characters kill Rubric Terminators for days. So I'm expecting this to happen. But when I go in, James, I mean, he confirmed this afterwards. He literally couldn't fail a 4-up, right? This Terminator block is making every single save it has to make. Every character, I'm making it fight last. I'm slapping it with like 3 or 4 of the most dangerous melee characters in the game, and they will not fall over. They just keep coming back. And he's rezzing them as well. And so that almost makes a game of it, because for a moment it's looking like he's going to be able to push through my characters. I think he kills one of them, maybe the Succubus, I can't remember. One of them dies. It looks like he might just push through and be able to roll through to the last and start, interrogating people and everything else. But then the Terminators, unfortunately, just about run out of steam. So the mission kind of swings back from there. And so it was one of those ones, we kind of chatted afterwards, and James was a little down on primary, because I was able to sneak racks around the side and start stealing his sort of far right objective, all the usual Drukhari stuff. But it was the secondary game where he'd left himself in a position where he had to come to me, and there was definitely a way for him to set it up where he didn't have to do that. He could have been Wart Ritualing in the middle. He could have been doing Stranglehold as well, throwing rubrics away like I was throwing racks away and sort of biding his time. And so he'd left himself in a position where he had to chase the game, and that meant he got overstretched, and I played around him. So I was happy with it, because
very controlled.
I don't play controlled long game that often, and I don't like to the last very much, but I felt like
you're much more of a YOLOer for that, aren't you?
I am a YOLOer. I like to get in and make trouble and see what opportunities come out of the trouble that I make. But in this game, it was very, very chilled, and I knew that if I got too close to 1,000 tons, certainly stuff like Harlequins, it's just all dead. It's hundreds of points dead if it gets too close to them for the mortal wounds and everything else.
So what was the final score then, Tom?
That finished 93-76.
Okay, so I didn't still.
Yeah, it was a solid showing. So I literally just dropped my 4 on Nachman, which was just because he was quite defensive in his corner. I was kind of like, I can never get in there. And we were working it out, and with a different secondary game, that's on its way to being a draw / something that we have to really fight in the middle over. James, lovely opponent. Lovely opponent, had clearly come from a more sort of emotionally intense game before, and
Yeah, it's always hard.
Had rushed through a couple of decisions, but we had a really good-hearted game. And I say these Terminators just would not flipping die. Like his dice were great, but they couldn't help him out of the situation he'd found himself in. But we had a really good time. So thank you very much, James. It was great.
That's great. So from one of my dear armies to another, Chris, game 3, Chaos Demons.
Yeah. So Sean and I had previous. Because we played each other at the LGT a few years ago. So I was looking forward to my revenge. But he had a really interesting list. It was one after Lee's own heart. Mm-hmm. It was Be'lakor, 3 keepers, Bloodletters, Pinks, Demonettes, all the fun stuff. The way the mission was, it was a 5-die mission. So the way it was going to go was he was going to run at me. I was going to try and kill him, and could I kill him quick enough? And obviously, Be'lakor's really hard to kill. Mm-hmm. These keepers had like 4-up invuln or -1 to wound or -1 to hit, all sorts. And then you've got the Pinks, which are 25 4-up invuln bodies, which can sit on that middle objective. And I don't have a huge amount of attacks. So he got first turn and moved forward a bit. He didn't quite line it up right. He'd chosen Psychic Interrogation, and it's a 24-inch cast. My sisters can only deny 18 inches, but he didn't think about that. So he gave me the chance to basically do my 4-up deny, which I did for 2 turns in a row.
Ouch,
so that was quite nice. And in fact, it was such a problem for him that he made an interesting play turn 2. On turn 1, I'd got positioned my salvo. I just basically stayed in my deployment zone, but I positioned my salvos so I could shoot into his keepers. The first unit of 3 did literally nothing to keeper secrets. The next unit of 3 went into another one. He positioned 2 behind these dense cover crates. The next unit did literally nothing to a keeper secrets, and I'm like, come on, guys, you're the Emperor's finest. We could do something here, boys. And the third unit one-shot him. So, there we go.
That is D3 plus 3 damage for you, ladies and gentlemen. That's how it goes.
That's where it was, boys. Thank you. Anyway, he then decided he was going to be quite an aggressive player. So Be'lakor flew and landed in my lines, as did the keeper, one of the other keepers. And then he launched his other one as well. So I've got Be'lakor in my lines, in my deployment zone. I've got keeper secrets in my deployment zone. I've got next keeper secrets roughly about the mid-board. I've now got 25 pink horrors in the middle of the board as well. All wraps around my single Alaris.
That's the dream for him.
That is the dream. It's absolutely the dream. So he then makes some interesting choices. Now, Be'lakor, or he does some whipping of my Sagittarium who sat on objective, and I take the cover saves and I completely fluff them, and I lose my sole model on my objective. And on the other flank, I've got my Sagittarium Guard who are doing the data intercept or whatever the thing is. Which
that's the mission one for this one, for the scouring.
So it's a scouring. So I had to be alive on my objective. I'm like, it's fine. I'll be fine. I wasn't fine. The keeper just completely wiped those Sagittarium Guards. So 3 damage attacks, and apparently Transhuman just didn't work really. He kind of just ignored that. Then he decided to charge Be'lakor into my 5 Sisters of Silence to stop my deny. Obviously, they all died. Didn't even bother rolling it out. But he was just basically saying, you're not going to be able to kill Be'lakor.
But you can kill Be'lakor, I can tell you.
He absolutely can die, yeah.
And I'm like, oh god, so I've got to kill a keeper. I've got to kill Be'lakor. I've just scored 0 on my primary. I just haven't scored my data intercept, and he's getting that for fun in his backfield. I'm starting to sweat a bit. So I kind of just basically move everything close to Be'lakor. I've got a unit of bikes set up to charge into the keeper, but I'm also aware of any sort of interrupt. I reposition myself. I get another one of these other lone Alaris ready to charge into the middle and just... Oh, that was it. Also, he'd rolled a 1 on his horrors, and the 4 pinks I'd killed all came back to life. I was like, don't you? Anyway, the long and short of it was that I started shooting into Be'lakor, did about 4 wounds to him, gave up, shot the salvos into the keeper to kind of soften him up for the charging bikes, and just one-shot him again. So, sorry. And then with Be'lakor and 12 wounds, I charged in everything. and the Dreadnought I thought was the best chance went first, and went boom. He went huge.
So I did nothing, or he one-shotted basically.
So I got through 2 wounds. I rolled a 5 for the flat 6 damage and a 1. So he was going to be left on 2 wounds. I said, "Can I re-roll the damage?" We looked it up. Yes, I could. I can't re-roll hits and wounds.
Yeah, you are allowed to roll damage. Yep.
And I rolled a 6. So Be'lakor went bye-bye.
Wow.
And that was a big moment, just clearing those lines. But I was still really behind on the points. Then his bloodletters dropped into me. His other keeper came at me. I tangle-footed the blood banner, so it was my D6 versus his D6 cancelling out. He failed both of his rolls for his charge into me.
Ouch.
I then just had to work out how can I kind of try and chew through him quickly enough. I just went on the offensive. I pushed forward, and it was really squeaky bomb time. Managed to, in turn 3, basically with 2 units of bites, kill all the pinks. And it ended 85-77 to me.
It's a close game.
But that was only on the 5th turn did it turn around, because I was able to turn the primary. And we actually scored equal on the primary. So the only reason I beat him was on the secondaries, because he scored 12 for Nachmund, 8 for Engage, and 9 for Psychic Interrogation. And I scored 12 for Stranglehold, 12 for Report, and 13 for Assassinate. Because I was always going to score well for killing the big stuff.
Yeah, if you take the big boys out in Demons,
double benefit,
it's a double whammy, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So they stack. So yeah, really enjoyable game, really close. I was
great.
Proper sweating it on the chat. I was like, I don't think I can come back in time.
I can tell that you were sort of worrying, yeah.
I was worried. But
Demons, let's put you in that spot. They're a real aggro list, aren't they?
Yeah.
That's why I'm excited to play them.
Yeah, it really like a really fun list for him to play.
Yeah. Good. Okay, Tom, I actually don't know what your next game was. So I looked through.
I played a man
Chris's
called...
notes, it just said another game.
So I played a man called James, and he was playing Imperial Knights.
Oh, hello.
I have run Eldar into Knights 3 or 4 times now, and the first couple of times I have died catastrophically, and then the last time I played Chaos Knights was at Twisted Warp, and I managed to beat them. They're actually quite a tough match for Eldari, because a lot of our anti-tank is quite swingy, and if the saves don't go our way, we get left very vulnerable to all the sheer weight of shooting, and they can pick us up quite nicely. So in this game, it was essentially the key things were Psychic Interrogation worked a treat, because it was on the scouring, so his big knights literally had to come to within 24 inches of me in order to play the game, because that's where the objectives were. So the Shadows here just sat scanning brains and getting me points all game. But the most pivotal thing was that the way that James had set his terrain up had created these kind of 2 channels that he'd need to bring his big boys through to get to the objective. He'd put some crates down in this very center and had sort of divvied up around that. And essentially I went first and was able to just yeet a Star Weaver into each of those gaps all game. So there was always a little Harlequin transport with an invuln. I was boosting the invuln on one of them to 3. In that gap, that meant, although he was killing the absolute shit out of me, and I think I was near tabled, I think by the death I had like 1 pack of Grotesques in one corner, that was it. Eventually his Megara got to the Shadows here and just whomped her at the end, which was very funny, because she'd been reading his mind all game, and then he just stomped on her. But that was essentially it. It's a good elves into knights goes this way. The elves try and take knights out. They go in, they score well, but then they run out of resources and essentially get tabled unless he managed to get one of the big knights down. In this mission, with the way things were set, and because I was blocking him off, I just opted to pick off Armigers and War Dogs instead. I never even tried to kill the Megara until he had 2 Megaras, by the way, 2 Megaras and a whole bunch of War Dogs, so big, brutal knights. And so on the primary, he just fell so far behind. I got a full primary, he got 27. Because Harlequins and boats were just dying for the cause and keeping him pinned in and keeping him getting primary. So it ended 87-82. Phenomenally close game, because his secondaries went way better. He maxed everything. He maxed Assassinate. He maxed Grind. He maxed Yield No Ground, which is the new Knight secondary.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, very strong showing from him. Completely tabled me, but because I'd held him up and kept him pinned in for a couple of turns, he just couldn't catch up on primary. So lovely guy, really good game, all hinged on being able to shove those Star Weavers into the gaps and stop him coming forward.
That sounds great. Well played. So we come on
super violent.
the best games.
Yeah.
So we come into, I guess, the final game now of day one.
Yeah.
I guess you're both feeling pretty exhausted by this point. So what could you enjoy more, Chris, than a mirror match?
Yeah, that was ideal. I do love a mirror match, and Custodes are so much fun because it can unfortunately come down to battle of the 4-pin ones. We chose there's no secondary in the middle of the board, so all the terrain was off to the side, the objectives were off to the side. He had more infantry than me and less bikes. He had 1 4-man bike unit, and he had the ability to take psychic interrogation, which of course he did. Essentially, once we picked our objectives, so I chose banners to the last on my bikes and Auric Mortalis to kill his unit of bikes. He chose banners, psychic interrogation, and might of terror, which was kill something of mine but kill nothing, but not lose anything.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
We worked out that if we both sat in our deployment zones, I won. So he had to come to me. So he went first. He moved everything forward. I kind of shuffled around a bit. He then charged his shield captain on bike into me and completely fluffed. I left his shield captain on bike on 2 wounds. I then set up all of my bikes to shoot into him and just have the first go at kind of blasting away with the salvos. And he didn't fail a 4-up invulnerable. And because he didn't fail a 4-up invulnerable, literally nothing died. And again, his shield captain managed to survive as well. And then he hit me. And because he's got lots of infantry, he's kind of... He's getting the first opportunity to do the combat. Obviously, I didn't want to go to him because I'd chosen to the last on my bikes. So I wanted to just hover back and shoot and attack when possible. But he played it really well. He hit me hard on one flank with 4 bikes, shield captain, Trajan, wardens, and Galatus. On the left side, he had some troops, some more wardens, and Mr. Worldwide, the Praetorian Plate guy, and just kind of came at me. And I was having to refocus a lot of my forces to the left flank to try and deal with all of this nasty stuff. And he was stealthily hitting me on the other side at the same time. And I just couldn't punch hard enough, Highlight would be my Trajan just annihilating his Trajan because he decided to fail all his 4-ups there. So Trajan took 18 wounds, which was fun. It was... He played it well, but if he loses a bunch of stuff... the other thing, I had a unit of 3 bikes sat back and they were going to be my counter-punch. He had an 11-inch charge with the Galatas. He just thought he'd try it. He rolled to 12 and he got in. That held up. He was then in the Qatar, which means you roll off for the fullback. I failed. So I couldn't fall back and charge with them. I spent 2 CP to fall back and shoot and charge, and then couldn't do either. Ouch. So a combination of bad dice, but also I think he played it well. He hit me hard, and I think his list was probably better anti-Custodes than mine was. I think
one thing you mentioned, isn't it, is being prepared for the mirror because we thought it might happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having lots more infantry is actually the way forward. I thought I wasn't able to maximise my bike unit because I'd gone for to the last. So that was where maybe having mental interrogation for my list would have helped, because obviously the dense cover banner is a complete waste of time in the mirror. So it finished 76-52, so not a high scoring game at all. No. And I still had stuff left, and he had one flank, I had the other, because I was able to sweep through eventually. I didn't get anything on Auric Mortalis, didn't get anything onto the last. I only scored 6 banners. But he played it well, and he was an absolute delight to play. He was just we had a great time. We both turned up like exhausted, just laughed, and we had a great time. So thanks a lot for the game, Alex.
So from one mirror to almost another.
Almost a mirror. So just boring old Drukari this time for you, Tom. No Drukarliquins in this one. But not that boring though, because I came up against in my round 4, and it was what I was saying to people before. They were like, "Do you want to come and get food now and just sack off the final game?" And I was like, my gut sense was that game 4 I was going to get to play someone really good or someone that I'd heard of, because that's just, by that point you've won a bunch of games, you're into the scary territory of the event. So my chances were quite good, and I was indeed drawn against Paulie Wallace, who is the sort of the lead host of the Real Space Raiders podcast. Obviously, they're massive. Paulie has the most beautifully painted Drukari army I think I've ever seen, sort of orange and patterned, wonderful Raiders, absolutely beautiful.
He won Best Painted, didn't he?
I think he did, yeah, because he's a fantastic modeler and painter. And so I'd listened to Real Space Raiders a lot during lockdown. which is when I was sort of really sort of consolidating Drukarli as one of my main armies. And so knew Paulie very well, knew Paulie's thought process very well, and knew Drukarli very well. And so it was a really interesting game lining up against each other, because Paulie was a little bit spooked, I think, by the Harlequins and by the speed, because he didn't know what they could do that well. But I was very much aware that actually in this matchup, Harlequins were a handicap rather than a benefit. So we took kind of mirror plans, and it was quite funny because he revealed his plan. He was like, "Oh, this might surprise you, but I've taken this, this, and this." And I was like, "It doesn't surprise me because I've taken the exact same thing."
Yeah.
So we'd both taken Engage, Nackmund, and also To the Last, because we were both trying to put that pressure on each other to come and force the issue by having that 15 points sat. Now, the issue is that for Paulie, To the Last is some Trueborn, a Court of the Archon, and Drazar. And for me, my To the Last is 10 Grotesques and Drazar. Now, Trueborn sitting at the back is much less of an issue for Paulie than 5 Grotesques sitting at the back is for me. So I was in a pattern where I was having to hold back stuff that I probably needed, I think, in this game, and maybe Psychic Interrogation would have been the one. I didn't pick it because I'd just seen what a Drukarli player can do to someone that tries to play Psychic Interrogation to them, so I stayed away from it. But actually, having watched how Paulie played, his Homunculus was very much on the ground, buffing Rax all game, and actually I probably could have played around it and tried to get him, but that's a counterfactual. Maybe Paulie plays very smart and makes that really hard for me, actually, in practice. So was happy enough with that. I went first, which I didn't want. I wanted to go second and react to him because, again, he seemed a little bit spooked. And so the situation as we had it was the Harlequins burned out hard and bright on one flank, trying to pin Paulie back in. And in the early stages of the game, I managed to be scoring my secondaries better than him. I was scoring Engage for full. He was reluctant to come out and score Engage at all turn one. But actually, over the long durée of the game, what Paulie played really well was he waited for the thing that he had and I didn't to kick in. And that was Power from Pain, right? He knew Power from Pain was going to kick in. He knew I didn't have it. And so we get to turn 3, turn 4. His stuff is hitting better. His stuff is get a 5-up invuln. My stuff doesn't. And so by that stage, it gets harder and harder to keep winning the combats and keep winning the fights. And he's able to commit with it.
Goes away, doesn't it?
Exactly. And the advance and charge that he's got and I don't on his Drukarli units just means he can just play around me and just isolate and destroy my kind of characters and Harlequins units. And eventually kind of rolls back up to my end of the board. And I managed to protect my To the Last. I don't lose my To the Last units, so I score well. I get 79-92. The other clever thing he did was he realized he was playing my game as far as Nackmund data was concerned. I was ticking it off. I was stopping him ticking it off. So actually what he did with his reserves was he just brought them in to shut me off getting that final quarter. He ticked off R&D later on, turns 4 and 5, once he'd pushed me back, because he realised that if he kept coming forwards, I was going to sneak in and get more on that as well. So Paulie played a really good game. He's been playing Drukarli for a lot of the sort of the sort of 9th edition season, competitive season, and it showed. And it's an army where I think Drukarli had the edge in that particular matchup, and I wasn't tooled up to deal with the sheer weight of bodies and sort of cheap trading infantry. But we had a really good game. It was really nice to both be kind of chatting Drukarli and chatting sort of Eldar tech and the sort of niche cases of the rules and everything else. And I think, Paulie's an absolute gent, and it was the ideal opponent for round 4 because we were both exhausted, but we both knew what the other person's army could do. And although Paulie was mildly concerned in the middle, he played a really good long game to roll me over for that kind of big primary swing at the death and take the game. So all credit to him. Well played, Paulie. Really enjoyed it.
Well done to both of you for finishing day 1.
Yeah. It was so tiring. It's 4 games.
Like just, on 10.
4 games is just 4 games is insanity. So we were back to the hotel. I had like 1 beer and then passed out.
Late pizza at 11.
Oh god, just knackered, absolutely. Knackered.
And what more could you have to look forward to, Chris, than your own round of Drukarli in the morning?
Precisely. So,
Thick City.
Well, I got to take on Thick City, which has obviously got quite the reputation.
It's dead now. Dead build doesn't exist.
Surely it's dead into Custodes, right?
It's dead. It's completely dead.
Shall we find out? So,
sorry.
So one thing for here, huge learning point for me. Turns out if you're prepared and you've got an established game plan for the mission already, it makes a big difference. Because Lee and I had played Data Scry Salvage, and we practiced place train, and I did exactly the same thing when I played Lee. And I set up the training exactly the same way. I deployed exactly the same way. And I just felt confident going into what I needed to do. I chose an engage because the deployment zones basically puts you in all 3 quarters anyway. I had chosen grind them down because he had lots of units. He had Talos, he had Grotesque, he had big blob of Rax, he had some Venoms, he had some Incubi, Drazar, some Court stuff. And then I had also chosen Auric Mortalis on the 3 Talos, so I wanted to kill them and get up to 15 points for that. And he's a lovely opponent. He'd been like me, up really early on the Saturday, and then played all the games and then gone to bed really late and then up really early again. So we'd been through, he'd done the same sort of things. We were both shattered. It just wasn't a game. I got first turn. I just enacted my game plan, took the middle. I went off, fired all my bursts, all my salvos into the Talos, killed one of them. But then he came at me with his big blob of Rax, did his advance, did his Animus Vitae so he could charge my shield captain, rolled a 1, CP rerolled into a 1. So they just sat there like, oh no, the Talos charged into my other bikes, killed one bike. Yeah. And then it was a bit of a slog fest, but I'd taken all the primary. He chosen Herd the Prey, but I was just engaging for fun.
It's not going to work.
It was brutal. The game finished 96-24 because I got 12 on grind. I didn't kill anything on the first turn, but I killed 12 on grind, 14 for engage, 15 for Auric because I killed the Talos for 5, in combat for 5, nowhere near my deployment zone for 5. Nice. He got 2 for Herd the Prey, 8 for Rod, and 3 for Assassinate.
Ouch. Yeah, that hurts.
And only 2 on primary, and that was from data intercepts.
2.
So that's the old guard getting chased out by the new.
Yeah, it was brutal.
Beaten out good and hard.
His dice were appalling, but I don't think it matters.
The double one on the Vitae is, that's what will always happen with it. If you set yourself up to need the advance and charge, it will fail you, but still awful, appalling luck.
Really lovely guy. We had a great time. Yeah. He goes to a lot of events. Hopefully to see him again soon. He's a diehard Drukarli player. He's been doing it for a while.
Yeah.
It wasn't to be for him, I'm afraid.
All right then. So Tom, Necron's up next for you, I believe.
Necrons, yes. So this was a whole thing. So the first run over the list, we got back at the hotel. First run over the list. Chris is like, oh, why do you get to play Necrons? Blah blah blah. Oh, you always get lucky with the match, which I do. I get very lucky with my matchups at events. It's true. So initially there's a bit of me going, oh yeah, Necrons, they're not that good, are they?
Yeah, but they've got lots of points drops on support.
So that's it. So you're looking over the list and you're thinking, that's a lot of Wraiths. That's 9 Wraiths, 9 Scorpec Destroyers. That feels like a lot of stuff for a list to have. But the first time I looked over it, I was like, well, I'm not sure, other than I could see it was going to be an OBSEC, Steely objective type list. But I was like, I can't quite see where the cutting edge is going to come from. And then we realised I'd missed that at the top of the list is the Silent King. And I just missed him.
That's a lot of spice.
That's 420 points of pretty spiciness. And then, so I got there in the morning, and I'd also looked back and seen who's this chap already played. And it was just a series of gutted Eldari lists. Like he'd smashed Drukari, he'd smashed mixed Eldari piloted by James Grover from Goonhammer. So I was like, okay, chances are this is going to hurt then, because he's literally rolling over lists that play a very similar way to mine. Just get there in the mornings, lad called Matt, really, really fun guy to play a game with. We had a really good time. Turns out he's the Necrons coach for Vanguard Tactics, so he knows what he's talking about. And he was, he had that Vanguard Tactics ethos about him. He's just a very Grecian, very handsome man. They all seem to be carved from stone, these guys. But he picked a really solid game plan because he had Code of Combat, Nachman Data, and Engage. And Code of Combat with the Silent King in a matchup like that, and he had a Catacomb Command Barge well, means he just needs to kill a few units, and he's on his way to 15. He's in a nice spot, and it kind of invites me to try and have a go at the Silent King, which I don't want to do when there's bajillions of Wraiths and Scorpex and stuff around him. I took Engage, I took Nachman Data, and I also took No Prisoners, and that was probably the weakest pick of the 3, but I was very conscious that I was going to spend the whole game trying to chew through Necrons, and either I'd manage it or I wouldn't.
Yeah.
And in terms of how the game played, it was a hold 2, hold 3, which normally for an Eldar player is great, but in this case was not, because there was everything obsec with a lot of mobility. And I was like, actually, this is one of those games where he's going to be better at the primary game than me. And what I think, looking back at it, I think what I needed to do was just go, right, everything I have is going down one side and going at the Silent King if he comes anywhere near me. And I just forget about one flank in the short term and try and punch a big hole in his army and work my way out. But I did what I'd been doing in the other games. I was playing for the different flanks and hoping to come back over later. And I did actually get about 10 Harlequins into his back lines and cause some trouble at one stage, but it wasn't enough. Because with the obsec, and with the Wraiths in particular, with the 4-up invuns and everything else, he had a few nice resurrection rolls. Was literally bringing back a Scorpec like every time I killed it. But to be honest, Matt had a much more cohesive game plan and a solid army in this case, and mine just bounced off him. Just didn't have the tools to get through all the Wraiths, and I'd killed the Silent King, which was nice. That was a sort of a nice moment. Yeah. Popped him, and then Matt auto exploded him to kill a bunch of my guys, which was when we had a good laugh over that. It was very, very funny. But in terms of the primary mission, Matt just kept holding on to the mid board all game, and scoring far better at it. So he was a really good player. I think he showed that you can do a lot with Necrons if you put your mind to it and have a solid game plan and lean into those really powerful units. And I got absolutely rinsed. So thank you very much, Matt. It was very fun to be the third Eldari opponent you'd beaten in 3 games. So.
Good stuff. Chris, going to come back to you then. So something you've done a lot of lately is play against Thousand Sons. Now, used to be a really hard matchup for Custodes. Not so much now, given the changes. Do you want to talk us through that game?
Yeah, so I turned up to the table and Matt was loving the fact that he was playing Custodes for the 3rd time.
Well, he must have done well to get to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he'd won 1 and lost 1. But the one he'd won, the guy had the Psyker for mental interrogation, so it cancelled out a
turned on
and
so much.
Gave him Wrath of Magnus for 15. Really interesting game, actually. I always find with Thousand Sons, and especially with Custodes, is that even if you can get ahead, you're still losing stuff, and Thousand Sons can whittle you down. The Thousand Sons shooting is ideal into Custodes as well, because of the AP2. And, you can get so many shots. So his special sauce was he had 2 10-man Terminator blobs. He was caught of time, so he could bring back some models as well. The terrain situation was fascinating because it was Dawn of War style thing. It was that weird mission. It's called Tide of Conviction with really weird secondary deployment objective markers. Now, I'd obviously wanted the jumping point, so I basically put all of my terrain as close to the line as I could. He deployed his, or the midway point, he deployed his right at the back. And it basically worked in his favour and also didn't. So it worked in his favour in as much as it gave me no jump points. So my first turn, I could only really just move slightly forward and then try and hit him next turn. But it would give him an opportunity to shoot me because I couldn't hide behind terrain. I'd have to be in terrain to make my charges the next turn. The problem was it gave me a great opportunity at Stranglehold because his middle objectives were just right out in the open. Mine were behind terrain where I could just sit there and hold them. And that was realistically it. He also chose Burn Empires as a stratagem.
Oh, never seen anyone take that one before.
Yeah, so you have to hold an objective in the middle of the board.
For a whole turn. But he had nowhere to hide. It would have been great if I could take it, because I could have scored that, but he couldn't. So I think there's probably a bit of conflict between terrain placement and his secondaries. He chose Assassinate as well. In this game, I didn't really need my characters. I did put them forward right at the end when it kind of didn't matter as much. Sure.
I got first turn. I just moved everything into the terrain and went, right, salvo launchers, see how many Terminators you can kill. And essentially what happened was Matt couldn't make a 5-up invulnerable to save his life. And my shooting was super efficient.
Yeah, the opposite player to who Tom had.
Yeah, exactly. And 6 Terminators died. And I said, go. So he resurrected 1 Terminator, moved up to the middle of the board. Also, you got an additional 2 points for holding your opponent's middle board objectives. He had no chance of ever getting to mine, but I just sat a unit of bikes there and went, well, see if you can kill them. His Terminators kind of
the injured ones came and killed them. The big 10-man moved forward on the other flank and shot into my bikes. He killed 4 bikes in turn 1, which, as a Custodes player, that hurts. It was then up to me to kind of slam into his lines. And again, he failed all of his saves against the salvos. So I was able to wipe out that unit on the right-hand flank on the middle objective. I then slammed into the Terminators on the left flank with Shield Captain, 3 Wardens, and 2 bikes. The Dreadnought failed the charge. Killed 5 of the Terminators. But at this stage in the game, I'm just throwing stuff at him, saying, go and kill it. To be honest, I wasn't that great on my 4-up Invulnerables. My 4-up Feel No Pains against Mortals, but he wasn't rolling well. In order to do well in this matchup, your dice need to spike, and mine need to go low, and his need to go high for the psych. So if I keep failing my 4-ups and he keeps blasting me with loads of stuff, that can have a big dent, but it just didn't go that way. And the big issue was I was just racking up this huge lead because I was denying him primary.
It's too late at that point, isn't it?
It's a whole 2, whole 3, and he's only holding his 1 in his deployment zone. So that was it. So I'm cancelling out Burn the Empires. Obviously, he's getting Psychic Interrogation each turn. Assassinate's quite hard, but he's not scoring any primary. And because of that, I was just in a really commanding position the whole game. We finished 93-48. It was a pleasure to play. He did the thing I like to do, go over the top, jokey, salty. And we really just baited into each other. So I was just mocking him. He was mocking me.
It's the best way to do salt, isn't it? Without doubt.
Exactly. You've got to lean into it. His friend was there who dropped and was watching, and he was a really nice guy. I think they're 40k super friends.
I've heard of them. Yeah.
I think Matt might be listening because he did follow our Facebook page. So hi, Matt. Hope we get to play you at the team tournament in a couple of weeks because I think that would be a really good fun game. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think probably the big thing was the conflict between the terrain and the secondaries chosen, which could make it closer. But obviously, it gives me more jump points if his terrain is closer. So it's just a really hard matchup. But he did his best, I think, and. Yeah, it was a great game.
So then, Tom, your penultimate game. Talk us
penultimate game. Yeah, you'll notice I said one of my goals was to play Tau and Custodes to learn what they do, and that thus far I have played 5 games of 40k and haven't played either of them. Yeah. So I finally got my wish, and I played Angus with his Tau, and boy, what a list did I play. He had he had triple Storm Surge, which, as it turns out, is a big flipping Lord of War that Tau have that I don't think I've ever seen before. And he had 120 Kroot and a bunch of Kroot Hounds and other weird chaff. So it was a huge wall of Kroot out in front of these 3 massive gun platforms. And Angus was a lovely guy. He put himself on the chess clock because he was worried about playing to time with this list. Yeah, and I think the combination of chess clock plus his game plan involves keeping his 3 massive shooting things alive, and my game plan inevitably now has to involve going and wrecking them. It meant that it was a very fraught game because people who know me know I like to play around people and try and deny and get my points and play a sort of dance aroundy kind of elfy kind of game. As soon as I looked at his list, I was like, oh, I've just got to go in and just kill the hell out of that, or I'm going to lose. I've got no other choice. No guile, no strategic sort of whimsy with it. I've just got to go in and smash that, or it's going to smash me. And he set up with 2 of them in one corner and 1 on the other. And I went first, which I think I probably needed. I had the -6-inch range aura on the Shadow Seer, and it actually would have been interesting to see if his Storm Surge could actually touch anything with their no line of sight shooting turn 1, because I don't know that they would have done. But if I'd lost transports turn 1 going second and the Kroot had all got forward, that would probably been a horrible game. So I redeploy all my Harlequins except 1 boat, and that's, if I make an error, it's that I left 1 boat on 1 flank. I redeployed everything to one side and just went at him. I've got a couple of photos. It's very, very funny and very, very epic because you've just got this big screen of Kroot. You've got this building that they're all around. You've got Storm Surge behind, and I just fly at this horde with everything I've got and start just gunning down Kroot like there's no tomorrow. I think I kill about 50 in my first turn and just make a massive hole. But then Angus informs me that Kroot can now heroic intervene 6 with a strat.
Yeah. Wow.
So I'm in it, which is pretty amazing, right? That's an amazing tool to have. But it means that one of my boats that's come forward needs to take one for the team and just go and fight all the crew. So I charge a Star Weaver in. And this is where the game probably turns in a way. I think if this doesn't happen the way it does, I probably just get tabled, and that's probably the end of it. But the crew barrel into this Star Weaver that's tagged like 3 units and don't kill it. There's a whole bunch of them swinging at this one boat with 6 wounds, and it manages to tank all their attacks. So it still stood there, which means at the start of Angus's turn, his whole screen can't do anything. It can't come forwards. It can't start charging my stuff that's ready to jump him. So at this point, Angus gets a bit down, and it's worth saying Angus got a bit demoralised at this point because I think he was seeing more steps ahead than me. I'd not played Tau. I didn't fully understand the way things were going. But anyway, it was all to the good. He kind of countercharged with some stuff, brought some breaches out. But then I get over the crew, finish killing them off, and I'm into the Storm Surge. So I start tying them up, and I kill one of them. So I'm feeling quite good. Oh, Lee's gone. That might be the end of Lee's presence.
Yeah, Lee's batteries died, so Tom and I.
Okay, so Lee's batteries died, so that's okay. We will complete the job here. So I'm feeling okay on that side, but the problem is that I've left this one boat on the other flank, which hasn't really achieved much, and has meant that a couple of units of crew that Angus had on that flank have managed to come down and start taking objectives on that side and causing trouble. And I should have not even given him them. Shouldn't have not even given him something to charge. That should just been somewhere else out of the way. And the other crucial thing that turns this game is I picked Psychic Interrogation because Tau can't deny in any way.
No.
And Angus has a Kroot Shaper and an Ethereal. So my Shadow Seer's been quite happily sitting behind a building as this mad siege goes on and just reading their minds. And as I break through the building, Angus very cleverly runs both of them into Drazar.
Yes.
So he charges them both into Drazar, and we have this hilarious combat where for the first time in my life, I'm like, is it possible for Drazar not to kill something?
Please.
No, it isn't. Of course it isn't. No. He absolutely blenders both of them, and then I've got no one to interrogate. And so I've managed to get 6 points on it so far, but Angus has played it really well and has now meant that I'm now stuck on that one. And so Angus had taken to the last, which obviously works out disastrously because I killed 2 Storm Surge and get him down to 5. But Tau have got a new Stranglehold equivalent where they need to hold like half the objectives. He maxes that. He maxes Nakman data. I max no prisoners, killing all the crew. I get about 10 on engage, but I drop on interrogation. And we both shut each other off pretty hard on the primary, which means that we end in a 73-all draw, which is quite a remarkable game. And I think it finally swings because Drazar and my Grotesques and my Racks that have come through, I've got no CP left. And this is one of those missions where CP are quite scarce as well. I've got no CP left. And 2 of them failed charges. So I failed to get into his breaches and I failed to get into his Storm Surge with Draz. So Draz kills a Storm Surge, one-shots it, incidentally, but one-shots it 1 turn too late, which means that my whole swinging through his flank is slowed down and Angus is able to get back in with his handful of minutes left on his chest clock. So wonderful game, absolutely bonkers, made for a visual spectacle to have these great big walkers with my boats like flying at it and the crew in the way. So really, really fun game. And Angus, lovely opponent. As I say, got a bit spooked when he realised I was breaking through his lines, but actually then dug it out really well and showed that he was a really canny player. So it was a lot of fun. Massively enjoyed it. Haven't had a game quite like it.
No, I can imagine,
yeah. So a lot of fun. And Chris, take us through what happened next for you in your run.
Well, we're sitting at 4-2. Looking for that 5-2, and I'm drawn against Dark Angels with about 40 Terminators.
Oof.
Nasty, right? So I sit down, I set up, and my opponent's a bit late. Then I carry on setting up, and then still not here. And I'm looking around, and everyone's ready. Everyone's talking through their player place terrain. And eventually, I kind of just go, I don't think he's turning up. So I spoke to TO, and he says, "Oh, well, you get the win, 70." So
he's done a runner.
He's clearly seen the might of the Custodes. He's probably played them.
He doesn't fancy it. He's off.
I mathed it out, and it's a really hard game just to try and chew through that amount of 4 up in Vun, 4 to wound, bodies where he can just flood the board, and it was a 5-die mission again, so he can just hold. He can beat me on Stranglehold. I have to choose engage, and he'll beat me out on that. It's just a really hard game. Obviously, dice happen, things can happen. It is winnable, but it would have been a really hard game.
A real slog.
If it went roughly how I saw it in my head, he probably would have win like 90-80. So it's close, but I think he
That's very modest. That's very modest, Chris.
But, I'll take the 5-2 any day. So
absolutely.
It was anticlimactic, but it did mean I didn't get home at like 10 or 11. I did get to
Yes, and I can tell you that was horrible. So you can be pleased to have dodged that one.
I can imagine. So, that was me. That was me done. So what did you get in your final?
So I didn't manage to get Custodes. I was drawn with Sisters, and Sisters are an interesting army for Eldar because Eldar are elite killers in many ways. They like to pick on and trade well against very elite and expensive units. So they're great into Marines, they're great into Grey Knights, Thousand Sons, things like that. Sisters are even more cheap and cheerful than Eldar. So you've got this big carpet of cheap units that are very killy.
Yeah.
And a good Sisters list, so my opponent was called Paul, and he was a really lovely guy and had been on a good run with it, and it was a very violent Bloody Rose list. But it was quite unusual. He had a couple of Castigators, that's the new tank.
Yep.
And he didn't go with Repentia. He went all into Sacrosancts. Lots of Sacrosancts.
Okay.
Celestine, Morven Val, so a lot of the usual stuff. Battle Sisters and Seraphim supporting that. And he also had a Canoness who could turn off Invund in an aura, which is absolutely brutal against my stuff. Because Harlequins and Drukarli really need their Invunds. And so I kind of did the maths on the situation and was like, I'm not going to win a brawl with that. If I go into that, I'm gonna lose the fight. Yeah. So I had to chip away at it. And I sort of reverted to my style of play from the earlier games where I kind of picked on the flanks. And so my game plan was, what had I taken? I'd taken Stranglehold to the last and enactment data. And Paul took Assassination, Engage, and Grind them down. And in this mission, essentially, I was banking on my to the last carrying me over the line and being able to play around him and play enough for the outside objectives that I'd get enough primary on him to win the game. Ultimately, it was a disastrous first half of the game for me because my left flank, we just got completely totaled. I went in, I cleared him out of an objective once, and then his Canoness, Hannah, who was the Invund turning off one, Hannah came in, switched off my Invunds, and just everybody died. It was just a complete bloodbath. Everyone was dying. The mistake I'd made was that I'd sent Draz up that way, hoping that things would go well enough that Draz could kind of clean up. But Draz was one of my to the last, which meant suddenly Drazar's in this position where he needs to start running away, getting out of the trouble. He fought some Zephyrim that had come in further south of him to sort of try and get himself out of harm's way, but ultimately he got caught and got killed. So at that stage, I'm like, I'm 5 down. I'm doing okay for Stranglehold, but it's starting to look very, very peaky indeed. And essentially I was kind of had to resort. This was direct assault secondary, so taking objectives and killing things on objectives was key to getting those points. And I was running out of ways to do that. The right flank I'd taken pretty comfortably, and Harlequins had melted all the various Sisters units on that side. But Paul still had a lot of stuff, and all his big characters were still intact. I hadn't managed to take out Celestine or Val or any of those. So it was looking very, very peaky. And at this stage, a YOLO boat of 5 Harlequins flies out onto Paul's back objective.
Okay.
22-inch, jumping from the far right flank onto his back objective where he has 5 Sisters waiting.
Okay.
I've got 5 fusion shots. My Harlequins haven't hit reliably with fusion all event. They hit 5 times, wound 5 times. Paul rolls 5 failed saves on his Invun. And so I clean out his back objective out of nowhere, out of nowhere, having been completely rinsed. But I tried to make it so he was at least rinsing me a long way away from the action.
Yeah.
And that was the idea, is like stretch him because I'm quicker than he is. So if I'm going to get killed off miles away in the far left corner of the board. So at least he can't then come back later on and turn it all around. But it's like the Hail Mary of all Hail Marys. All of the math says that doesn't work. And I had a couple of Star Weavers there to throw some shuriken and hopefully chip away at them after that. But it was still a massive gamble. And that just about swung it, that Paul got hit on his primary for his round 4 and round 5. And so I was able to win 89-84.
So if those sisters don't die, do you lose?
I think probably, because that got me direct assault for 3, and it cost him 4 primary. So it's a 7-point swing, and I won by 5.
So yeah.
So I think it's one of those sort of solo moments.
Nice.
And as I say, so I had anticipated having that to the last 15. So I think with that, if I hadn't misplayed Draz, I could have edged it the way it was going anyway. But this was absolutely huge. Absolutely huge. So I don't know. Yeah, as I said, Paul at the time took it incredibly well, considering how much of a sort of smash and grab it was.
Yeah.
It was nuts. And I was pleased with it because it was the end of an event, and if to pull off a sort of snatch victory from defeat sort of moment at the very final game felt good. But Paul had played very well and had absolutely killed the shit out of me. Just killed so much of my stuff. Was a great player and a great guy. So really good game that I probably didn't deserve to win, I don't think.
The Eldari way, my friend.
That is the Eldari way. Yeah.
No, awesome.
And so that for me was 4 wins, 2 losses, and 1 draw, which was a great. Very happy with that. It was perfect.
Yeah, well, especially considering you know it was a bit of a trial list, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It was a slightly weird and experimental list and slightly unknown meta going into. So I was really chuffed with it and felt like all the games were really good. Good close games as well. I think that was nice. That was something I really wanted.
It sounds like they were all close.
Yeah. So really nice event.
Awesome, well done, buddy. Yeah. So for me, I finished 5-2. As I said, that 5th win feels hollow, but it's there. So I ended up 31st and you finished 33rd.
Yeah.
So we're really pleased with that. There's like
we're hugely pleased.
175 people. I think you look at the top 10. So the winning 2 undefeated lists were Tao.
Yeah.
And then
Vic and Alex Harrison.
Yeah, and then there were 6 out of 10 were Custodes.
Quite a lot of Custodes in there.
So
so it's an interesting one. We'll talk the meta another day. It's clear that we're going into a new era, I think, of 9th edition. There's a new set of big hitters and slightly new set of demands being placed on players going into the competitive scene. But it was nice and interesting to see that. It felt new. It felt fresh.
Part of it, I think.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't just the sort of Drukhari Admech binary that had existed for a few months previously, and it was actually a really diverse field. As although the top 10 looks like it's there's a couple of new books that are very strong. Actually, so many different armies, so many different things being tried, and the new missions themselves are awesome, aren't they? They're really good fun.
No, really, they just add that extra bit of spice, and it's something new to work out and adapt to, both in playing and with your list building.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is ideal there.
Yeah.
I guess we now wrap up.
Yeah, let's call it. Thanks, Lee. Well done. Good job.
That's if Lee chooses to listen to this one. But no, we'll be back soon where we'll have our usual service will resume.
Yeah, exactly.
And, we've got a couple of Lee is going to an RTT along with Paul. I'm going to a doubles tournament with Jamie. So we'll get this one out, and then hopefully we'll be back again very soon.
Yeah, and Jamie's going to make his podcast debut soon as well.
Finally. So thank you very much for joining, guys. Thank you, Tom. Pleasure as always.
Yeah, cheers, Chris. Thanks for a good weekend.
See you guys soon.
Yeah, see you later, guys. Bye-bye.